Hello and welcome to episode number 220 of the Lewiston Tribune podcast. My name is Trevan Pixley, and joined with me is courts and crimes, education reporter, kind of Swiss Army knife, reporter that we have here in the building, Miss Kaylee Brewster. Kaylee, how you doing?
Good.
Good. And today we are here to discuss something that during my high school days, I think was one of the banes of my existence, cell phone policies and, what they are in regards to the classroom. I remember back in my day, I already feel old,
Yeah.
but graduated in 2017. If your phone vibrated at all, you got your phone taken away. At least that's how it felt like.
Yeah.
Where are we at now with the cell phone policies?
So, it's interesting that you bring up, back in the day cell phone policies. I graduated in 2010 and it was, kind of a similar thing. And what's interesting about this issue is not that the policy changing. So the policy has, that a lot of these school districts have implemented have been the same since cell phone use has kind of increased in the classrooms. What's changed is Idaho Governor Brad Little in October issued an order requiring school districts to have a certain policy, and to meet the criteria of that, a lot of school districts basically just moved their policy from being in the student handbook to being a board policy.
Mm.
Why that's magical and needed and why the student handbook policy wasn't enough, it's a little unclear, but basically nothing has changed in the policies that these school districts have, or mostly nothing has changed. There may have been a few tweaks here and there, but just kind of where it's located. And I think one of the reasons that I think is behind it is it just kind of gives school districts a little bit more
Leeway, perhaps.
Leeway, and kind of I don't want to sound like it's military or heavily enforced, but just to kind of give school districts and teachers kind of a little bit more oomph when they're implementing those policies in the classrooms. Because I don't know if this was how it was when you were in school, but you kind of knew the teachers you could kind of get away with. And so it's kind of like, oh, in this classroom it's okay, but in this classroom it's not. And so it's kind of the other idea behind it is to kind of create a clear and consistent policy so everybody knows what the expectations are, whether that's teachers or students or parents, and basically gets everybody on the same page.
Mm-hmm. And I took a look at what Brad Little put on the table, and I did see a little thing that schools that implement these policies could get a $5,000 grant, or would receive a $5,000 grant. Did you? That kind of gives these schools more incentive to do that.
Right. And that was kind of when I talked to Lewiston School District Superintendent Lance Hansen. That was, he talked about that a little bit. I didn't ask every school district about that, but basically the funds from the grant can go toward implementing that policy. And it's not like, they're going to hire a phone security guy to stand guard and take people's phones. It's more having a place to put the phones. So a couple of the teachers that I talked to they actually repurposed racks and kind of caddies that were used for calculators so that students can put their phones there. And so maybe some of the grant money would go toward that. The Lewiston School District also has a work group committee that kind of is looking at these devices and everything. So if they come to the school board and they're like, hey, it would be really cool if we got this thing, then the school district can use the money for that.
Mm-hmm. In your chats with the Lewiston School District and all these other school districts, what have you kind of learned about these phone policies, and kind of what are these school districts doing to implement them?
It was really interesting. The policies were really, really similar.
Yeah.
and I was kind of expecting that, but it was like, even in smaller school districts, even in smaller schools, it's mostly the same all throughout. So it's heavily restricted at the elementary school level, which makes sense because you have younger kids. They're already easily distracted. And so at the elementary level, it's mostly like no phones at all once, everything like that. Middle school is a little less restrictive, but still most school districts have that policy of, if you, as soon as the bell rings, your phone is away. And once, at the end of the day, some of them have it where students can use them in lunch. When I talked to Lapwai School District Superintendent David Aiken, because Lapwai Middle and High School are in the same building, they kind of have the same policy for the middle school and high school students, which makes sense because that would kind of be a nightmare to enforce if it wasn't the same. And then, of course, with students being older and probably having more phones and more devices, and kind of wanting to teach those older students kind of how to use their phones properly. High school is kind of the least restricted, but usually if it's in the classroom, you have to put it away during what they call passing periods. So those times in between class, you can have them out. And a lot of them, or for some school districts anyway, and then most of them still allow students to use it during the lunch hour.
Mm-hmm. One of the weirder things here in this is, some of the school districts presenting the idea of putting them in certain holders throughout the day or just holding them in their locker. That's a little weird to me as somebody who always kind of had their phone on them in high school and somebody that always has their phone in their pocket. How many schools have you heard that are going to do, something like that, where at the beginning of the day you have to put your phone in like a pouch or something like that?
A lot of school districts. So some of the school districts, depending on the grade level, you have to put your phone in your locker somewhere. Most of them, for the high school level, you have to put them in a backpack or in some sort of secure place. Some of the policies that I read let students keep them in their pocket, but a lot of districts are not using that method. And it makes sense because if your phone is in your pocket and you feel it vibrate, or you hear it, or it's really hard, even as an adult, to resist the temptation to look. And once and even, I feel like even not looking, knowing that it's there can still be a distraction, because if it's in your pocket and it vibrates, or there's some sort of notification, even if you don't look, your mind is already gone because you're thinking, oh, what was that about? Oh, I can't look. Oh, but I want to, but I can't. Oh, maybe I can sneak. No, I shouldn't do it. And so it's like, from the moment it does anything, you've lost that student.
Mm-hmm. We talked about where cell phone use was when you and I were in high school, and have kind of compared it to where things are now as far as technology use goes. Do you think that the way that these school districts are, attacking this, going after their policies, do you think they're doing it in the right way? Do you think they're going in the right direction here?
It's interesting you asked that, because when I first started this story and Matt pitched to me, I was like, oh, this is dumb. Like, this is a dumb policy. Like, just like, who cares? But in working on this story, I have changed my mind. One of the things, when I talked to Scout Larson, one of the teachers at LHS, she graduated in 2011. And so, very similar kind of in our experiences there. And she said that she was kind of basing a lot of her cell phone use in the classroom based on what she had experienced, and it's changed a lot since then. And kind of when she was talking about that, I was like, oh yeah, you're right, like it is different. I didn't get a smartphone until 2016. So it's a lot different. And the other thing too is that that she mentioned is that students today don't know any different. They've never not had a device or a tablet or access to it. I mean, even I grew up with, we always had internet in our house growing up, but it was the, phone internet that made the horrible noise and took, 10 minutes to just open up everything. So that kind of has changed my perspective on it. It's a lot different now than it was when I was dealing with this at the high school level. And the other thing that I think with it is, one of the things I was thinking and going into this story was it's like, well, it's nice to have, it restricted, but it's like, it would be better if you could like teach kids, like, here's the time to use it. And that's one of the things that a lot of these school districts are doing is it's, giving them tools and opportunity to learn to regulate phone use on their own. And the other thing that's come out of it is that from hearing from some of the teachers and people at the school districts is students are kind of liking having, not all students, some students are kind of liking having that break from their phones, which makes a lot of sense because, I have that too sometimes where I'm out in the woods somewhere and it's like, oh boy, I can't use my phone. And then sometimes it's like, oh no, I can't use my phone and I might be lost. But yeah, kind of being able to, sometimes it's hard to know what it's like unless you do it. So it's kind of like, in some ways, phone addiction is very similar to any kind of addiction, where it's like until you get that break from it, you don't realize how good it is without it until you get that break.
Diving a little bit more into that, what have you heard from the students, either directly from them or from the teachers? How have they taken this, I guess, just overall? Is it more positive, negative?
Yeah, I mostly heard from teachers and kind of, superintendents and other district officials. The work group at the Lewiston School District on this does have students involved.
Yeah.
So a lot of these decisions aren't just coming from the adults bearing down on the students. The students do have a role and a voice in this. And again, kind of what I've heard from people talking is that, again, not everyone, and I don't think you will ever have a policy that students are happy with. But yeah, kind of like it's kind of like having that break has been beneficial, and not just having a break from kind of that noise of the phone and social media, but also having a break, having some quiet, but like realizing like, oh, I do focus better when I don't have this distraction, and I do better in school. And one of the teachers who Scout Larson, who I talked to, who uses the, you put your phone in the rack at the beginning of class, said that sometimes her students just like leave and totally forget their phones.
Yeah.
And they won't come back until a couple hours later. And I think that shows that it's like, okay, this is not only working, but it's like students are getting something out of it, because if they're just putting their phones away and then like immediately rushing back to their phones, then they're still thinking about it. But if they can leave their phones in the classroom and walk away for 5 minutes or a couple hours, then you kind of know that it's like, okay, it really is out of their heads and they can function without their phones, and they're not thinking about it, and they are getting that break, and they are learning how to kind of regulate that use.
Mm-hmm. And then just kind of going back to some, I guess, personal anecdotes here. What was cell phone use like back in 2010, Kaylee, in school?
One of the things I remember is one of the things that really stands out to me is so now most of the time whenever somebody has a phone, it's on vibrate or silent or whatever. But when I was in high school and junior high, there was still kind of people still liked having ringtones, and people would record music from the radio to get this like really gravelly song that they liked as their ringtone. But the other thing is, somehow somebody figured out that there is a certain pitch or frequency that only people under the age of like 25 can hear.
Yeah.
And so some kids were somehow were able to download that and change it as their ringtone. So you would be sitting in class and you'd hear this high pitched like dog whistle noise, and everyone would react, and the teacher would be up there and have like no idea what was going on. I think after a while they did catch on, because you would have students that were like making weird faces in school. But but I do remember one time, I don't think it was in my class, I think it was somebody else, and I can't remember if it was a substitute teacher or a student teacher, but they were under that 25 age limit or whatever the age limit was. They were young enough to be able to hear the noise, and they were like, guys, this isn't, you're not as smart as you think you are. Like, I know what this is. Yeah. The other thing was, this was back when T9 texting was a thing, and you would have people who, I mean, I not to brag, but I was pretty good at the T9 texting and could, look at not look at my phone. And so, yeah, there were people who would be texting in class and they kind of have their phone down or whatever. And I remember one teacher who said, he was like, I know you have your phone out because nobody looks down at their crotch and smiles unless you have your phone out. So yeah, there were definitely, we thought we were all smart, but there were definitely teachers that were catching on to us, and again, you kind of knew the teachers that you could get away with it with, but there were definitely some where you did not want to have your phone in class, for sure.
Well, I will say that this policy, I think, is necessary in this day and age, because I do think it is easier to get on your phone in class with the smartphones, because the slide to text phones, back in the day, you had to be a wizard to not get caught texting on those, because you were smiling on your crotch, and you did have to not look at the keyboard while you were texting. So it definitely was a struggle.
Yeah,
back in the day,
and it still made a little bit of noise. Like, I remember in classes sometimes where you just kind of hear these little button noises, and you'd be like, "What is that?"
Yeah, and man, I couldn't even imagine doing it with a flip up phone.
Yeah,
where you had to not looking the text on those.
Yeah,
that would be absolutely insane. So, just overall, what do you think about this policy? You think it's going to be a net negative in the area, net positive? What do you think this is going to bring for the schools in the area?
I think it's going to be good, and I think, and the other thing too with it is that it's going to change. Like, in another 5 years, there's going to be something else that will have to be modified, and I think that's the other thing too with with our generation and with the generation coming up, is our generation has kind of moved with the technology changes. And so we've kind of evolved with the technology, but the generation behind us and the generation behind them, they are smack dab in the middle of this thing, and they are changing with it where it is right now. And technology always changes, and it always, I don't want to say it gets better, but sometimes it gets better, sometimes it gets worse.
It definitely always wins.
Right. And so it's I think school districts are being smart in recognizing that it's fighting against it is not going to work. You're not going to win the battle against cell phones. So kind of figuring out how to make it work for teachers, how to make it work for students, and still be able to have that learning environment, because ultimately that's what they're there to do. You're not going to learn the things that you need to learn for either your classes or life skills if you're on your phone.
Yeah, 100%. Any other major takeaways that you had while you wrote this story or did the research on these cell phone policies here in the area?
Not anything that I can think of off the top of my head. Just again, when I was talking to Scout Larson about it, she mentioned the Motorola Razr, and that brought me back. But been thinking a lot about flip phones more than I have in the last couple days than I have in the last 10 years. So some nostalgia there, but some looking to the future and kind of seeing what's next. And I also think too, a lot of people and this happened even with my generation and our generation, but kind of, looking down on, doing the whole kids these days, don't do this or that. And having talked to some of the kids these days in other stories, we're going to be fine. The kids today are great. They are mature in some ways that I wasn't at their age. And when they are running the world, things are going to be just fine.
Yeah, I think my major takeaway from this, that I hope, with all these cell phones getting locked up and stuff, I hope this brings back note passing.
Yeah,
I hope people pass notes again.
that was one of the things that one of the teachers mentioned. Was it was like, back in the day, the only thing you had to worry about was note passing. And I do remember in one of my classes, I can't remember which one, there was somebody who was writing a note, and it was right in front of me, and I was able to look over her shoulder and read it. And I can't remember the exact details, but I remember it was pretty juicy, and that was definitely a distraction.
I wonder if any kids pass notes anymore.
Right, I think it's all through the phone, and that was another thing that was changing when I was in school. Was it was like there was another time where like it was like people were texting each other in class and everything, but I think it's mostly, and honestly, I feel like the main thing would be if I was in school today, I would be sending memes to my fellow students about things happening in the classroom.
I would be, and I think if this brings back note passing, I think every kid that goes through elementary school and middle school needs to experience the adrenaline rush of getting a note or trying not to get caught with a note. I will say one of my favorite note passing stories, since you shared one of yours, is I had a friend across, it was in elementary school, across the classroom from me, and he wanted to say something to me, and he tried like whispering it across the room while our teacher was reading. I couldn't hear him. And he balled up this piece of paper and a note and threw it all the way across the classroom. Made it. Nobody noticed. And I read it, and I'm like, I'm athletic. I can throw that back. And I got halfway across the classroom. Teacher picked it up, and then I got in trouble for passing notes. Don't have a cannon like I thought I did, Kaylee.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
That is. Did she read it out loud? Did she read it out loud?
No, I just got in trouble. I remember.
That's good. I do remember. I can't remember which teacher it was, but I do remember one teacher was like, if you read a note, pass a note in class, you will be required to read it in front of everybody.
Do you have any funny note passing or phone taken away stories from your days?
I was always too scared to do anything.
That clocked out for Kaylee.
I'm trying to think. The only other thing I remember is, again, because everybody had ringtones, if somebody's phone went off in class, no one moved.
Yeah.
Like, no one moved. And so a phone would go off, and everyone would just sit there and pretend like it wasn't theirs, but you knew that somebody...
Yeah.
It had to be somebody's. And I remember in 8th grade, somebody's phone went off in class, and it was the Pink Panther theme.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And so, again, kind of like nobody wants to react, but everyone was kind of sitting there just kind of like bopping along to the song, because it's like, that's a good groove to it.
Yeah.
Other than that one and I want to say there was in my Spanish class one year, there was somebody who was passing a note in Spanish, and the note was in Spanish. Like, it was like nice. A Spanish-speaking student. And I was so bummed because I was like, I can't read it. Like, I don't know. I know like 3 of the words because it was like one of my first Spanish classes. And so it was, but it was like, I desperately wanted to read it, but I only knew like 3 words.
You saw C biblioteca. Like,
yeah.
This is just yes library.
Right.
Yeah. This is going to be a good policy to keep kids informed and focused, but for funny memories and crack up moments, it is a shame that this is going away. Just one more ringtone story, because you brought that up. When we had those slide to text keyboards, is also in like 6th grade. One of the kids in my class, same kid that threw the note across the room, had a ringtone that he recorded from his computer, and it was "Looking Like a Fool with Your Pants on the Ground" from that American Idol audition. That guy that just said "Pants on the ground, pants," and now that just like brought back all memories of how cool the early 2000s were.
Right.
2010s.
And yeah, still those. The other thing was I wanted a Motorola Razr so bad. I thought they were so cool.
You never got one?
I never got one.
What was your one more? What was your first phone?
So my phone through high school and all the way through college was like a pay-as-you-go track phone. So it was like the cheapest of the cheap. I'm trying to think. The other thing that was weird about my phone too, not to go off too far, but it had this weird thing where like every so often it would just like time travel. So like I opened up my phone one time and it was like said that it was like January 1st, 2006 at like 2:45 in the morning. Huh. And it would just like randomly go back to that date and time. And it wasn't like it was like behind time. Like it was like it would be 8:30 in the morning, but my phone would say it was 2:45 a.m. January 1st, 2006. And I was like, and it was always the same. The time was different, but it was always like January 1st, 2006. And I was like, I don't know what's going on with this thing. So, maybe, right. So that was my phone. My phone was very special.
I still think my favorite phones to this day are the ones with the keyboards on it. I've brought that up a lot in this podcast, but like I have so much nostalgia for that.
Yeah.
Slide keyboards.
Yeah, I had that was the phone that I had. I had one with a slide keyboard eventually. I think my first phone was a flip phone. And then the slide.
I think my first one was a slide keyboard, and I probably got my first smartphone probably around, probably like 2014, 2013.
Yeah.
Probably somewhere around there. But this has been a good podcast. Kaylee, any other takeaways or anything else you want to add on the podcast before we sign off here?
No, I think that's it.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of the Lewiston Tribune podcast, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.